Jack Reacher stepped off the bus into a town that didn't want him. He didn't know it yet, but the town, Havenwood, had a way of making outsiders feel unwelcome. It wasn't with overt hostility. It was in the silence. The way conversations stopped when he walked into the diner, the way curtains twitched in windows as he passed. Havenwood was a place that held its breath, and Reacher, a man who noticed everything, noticed the suffocating quiet first. He had no destination, no plan. Havenwood was just a name on a bus route, a place to get a cup of coffee and maybe a meal before moving on. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. On the surface, it was idyllic, a postcard of small-town America. But a postcard is a single, perfect image. It doesn't show you what's happening just outside the frame. Reacher's internal clock, honed by years in the military police, told him it was just after 10 in the morning. He found a diner called the Maple Leaf, its sign faded and peeling. Inside, the coffee was bitter and the silence was thick. He sat at the counter, nursing the mug, his back to the wall, a habit he never broke. He watched the other patrons. A handful of old men talking in low murmurs, a waitress with tired eyes, a young couple who ate without speaking a word. It was on the community board near the door, pinned between an ad for a tractor repair service and a flyer for a church bake sale, that he saw the first sign of the town's sickness. It was a picture of a little girl with a bright, gappy-toothed smile. Her name was Lily Patterson, age 7, missing for 3 weeks. The paper was weathered, the corners soft from being touched by worried hands. Below it was another, for a boy named Sam Bell, age 8, missing for 6 weeks. And below that, another, a boy named Caleb Jones, age 9, missing for 2 months. 3 children, in a town this small, a town that probably didn't have 3,000 residents. That wasn't a statistic. It was an epidemic. Reacher finished his coffee, the bitter taste lingering on his tongue. He left a few dollars on the counter and walked out, the little bell on the door announcing his departure into a silence that now felt menacing. He walked to the sheriff's department, a small brick building that looked more like a library than a police station. A man with a thick mustache and a weary face looked up from his desk. His nameplate read, Sheriff Brody. "Help you?" Brody asked, his voice flat. "Just passing through," Reacher said. "Saw the flyers in the diner. 3 kids. That's a lot for a place like this." Brody's eyes narrowed. "We're aware. It's an active investigation." The tone was clear. "This is our business, not yours." "Any leads?" Reacher pressed, ignoring the warning. "Like I said, it's an active investigation. No witnesses? No ransom notes?" "Who are you?" the sheriff asked, finally putting down his pen and giving Reacher his full attention. The question wasn't just a question, it was a demand. "Nobody," Reacher said. "Just a guy who knows that kids don't just vanish into thin air. Not 3 of them. Not without someone seeing something." A deputy, younger and built like a fire hydrant, stepped out from a back room. His name tag read Miller. "Sheriff, is this guy bothering you?" "He was just leaving," Brody said, his gaze locked on Reacher. Reacher gave a slow nod. He knew when to push and when to wait. He had the scent of something rotten now, and he wasn't the kind of man to walk away from it. He turned and left the station, the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on him. He spent the rest of the day walking. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just absorbing the town, letting its rhythm, or lack thereof, seep into him. He walked past the tidy houses with their manicured lawns, and he walked past the abandoned lumber mill on the edge of town, its windows like vacant eyes. He saw the park where the children used to play, now empty, a single swing creaking in the wind like a lonely ghost. He saw the fear in the faces of the parents who called their children inside as dusk began to fall. He saw the suspicion in the eyes of the locals who watched him, the stranger, the drifter, the only person who didn't seem to belong. That night, he got a room in the town's only motel. It was cheap and smelled of stale smoke and despair. As he lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the faces of the missing children swam in his mind. Lily, Sam, and Caleb. They weren't just names on a flyer anymore. They were a problem he had to solve. And Jack Reacher always solved his problems. The next morning, he decided to visit the library. He knew that to understand a town's present, you had to understand its past. The librarian was a thin, nervous woman who watched him from behind her spectacles as he browsed the local history section. Havenwood, he learned, was founded by a man named Silas Sterling a century ago. The Sterling family had built the lumber mill, the town's primary source of income for generations. But the mill had closed down 20 years ago, and the town had been slowly dying ever since. The name Sterling was still prominent. A Sterling Park, a Sterling Avenue. The current patriarch, a reclusive man named Alistair Sterling, lived in a large estate on the hill overlooking the town. He was a benefactor, donating generously to the town council, the school, the sheriff's department. He owned most of the land, and in a way, he owned the town. Reacher found something else in the old newspaper archives. Small articles buried in the back pages. Over the past 2 decades, other children had disappeared. Not in a cluster like this, but one every few years. They were always written off as runaways or accidents. A pattern no one had wanted to see. Until now. The current disappearances were too close together, too numerous to ignore. As he was leaving the library, Deputy Miller's patrol car pulled up to the curb, blocking his path. Miller got out, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Got a few questions for you," Miller said, his voice hard. "I'm all out of answers," Reacher replied calmly. "You show up in town, and suddenly you're asking about the missing kids, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Some might find that suspicious. Some might find it suspicious that 3 kids are gone, and the local law seems more interested in a tourist than in finding them," Reacher countered. Miller's face flushed with anger. "You got a smart mouth. You know what we do with smart-mouthed drifters around here?" "I can guess," Reacher said, his body tensing, preparing for the inevitable. But before Miller could make his move, Sheriff Brody's voice cut through the air. "Miller, stand down." Brody got out of the passenger side. He looked at Reacher, his expression a mixture of frustration and something else. Resignation, perhaps. "My deputy is enthusiastic," Brody said, "but he's right. You're drawing attention." "The kind of attention you should be drawing," Reacher said. "I read the old papers. This isn't new. It's just worse." Brody's face paled. He looked around, as if worried someone might overhear. "Get in the car," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't talk here." Reacher hesitated for a second, then complied. This was a break. Brody was scared, and scared men sometimes told the truth. They drove in silence to a secluded spot by the river, the water flowing dark and cold. Brody killed the engine. For a long moment, the only sound was the rushing water. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Brody began, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "This town, it has a history. People here, they keep to themselves. They don't talk to outsiders." "They're scared," Reacher stated. "Of what, or who?" "Alistair Sterling," Brody said, the name hanging in the air like a curse. "His family built this town. He thinks he owns it. And maybe he does. His money is everywhere. He funds my department. He pays the mayor's salary. You go against him, you don't just lose your job, you lose everything. And you think he's involved with the missing children?" Brody flinched. "I don't know. I can't prove anything. The disappearances, they're clean, too clean. No witnesses, no forensic evidence. It's like they're ghosts. One minute the child is in their bed, in their yard. The next, gone." "Ghosts don't leave footprints," Reacher said. "People do. You just have to know where to look. Where were the children taken from?" "Their homes," Brody said, pulling out a small notebook. Lily Patterson was taken from her bedroom. The window was unlocked, but there were no signs of forced entry. Sam Bell disappeared from his own backyard while his mother was inside for just a few minutes. Caleb Jones. He was on his way home from a friend's house, a walk he made 100 times. He never made it to his front door. Reacher processed the information. Different methods, but the result was the same. A professional job, planned, executed with precision. What do the locations have in common? Brody shook his head. Nothing. They're all over town. They have to have something in common, Reacher insisted. Let me see a map. Brody unfolded a map of Havenwood and spread it on the dashboard. He marked the 3 locations with an X. Reacher studied it. For a minute, he saw nothing. Then, his eyes traced the lines, not of the roads, but of the topography. He saw the river, the woods, the old service tunnels for the defunct mill that crisscrossed beneath the town. All 3 houses, Reacher said, his finger tracing a path. They're all within 100 yards of an access point to the old mill's maintenance tunnels. Brody stared at the map, his eyes wide. My God, we never thought. They've been sealed for years. Seals can be broken, Reacher said. Someone is using those tunnels to move through town unseen. They can get to any house they want, day or night, without ever setting foot on a street. The realization dawned on Brody's face, followed quickly by a wave of despair. The main access is on Sterling's property. The old mill itself. It's private land, fenced off, guarded. Then that's where we need to go, Reacher said simply. We? Brody scoffed. You don't get it. I can't get a warrant based on a theory from a drifter. Sterling's lawyers would have me crucified. I'd be out of a job and the investigation would be shut down for good. I can't go. I can, Reacher said. I'm not a cop. I don't need a warrant. The look in Brody's eyes was one of a man trapped. He wanted to do the right thing, but he was terrified of the consequences. If you get caught, I won't, Reacher said. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. That night, Reacher prepared. He didn't need much. He was the weapon. He dressed in dark clothes and under the cover of a moonless sky, he made his way to the edge of the Sterling estate. The old lumber mill stood silent and dark against the stars, a skeletal monument to the town's forgotten prosperity. The fence was high, topped with barbed wire, but Reacher had scaled worse. He found a spot where a large oak tree grew close to the fence line. He went up the tree with practiced ease, swung onto a thick branch that extended over the fence, and dropped silently to the ground inside. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and rust. He moved through the shadows, a ghost in a graveyard of industry. He saw 2 guards patrolling the perimeter. They were sloppy, their patterns predictable. Amateurs. He bypassed them easily, melting into the deeper darkness near the main building. He found the entrance to the tunnel system where he predicted it would be, hidden beneath a rusted metal plate behind a stack of rotting lumber. The bolts were old but had been recently oiled. Someone was using this entrance regularly. He lifted the heavy plate and lowered himself into the darkness. The air in the tunnel was cold and damp, smelling of wet earth and something else, something antiseptic, like a hospital. He used a small penlight, shielding its beam with his hand, illuminating just enough to see a few feet ahead. The tunnel was narrow, the brickwork slick with moisture. He moved forward, his senses on high alert. After what felt like a mile, he saw a faint light ahead. He heard a low hum, the sound of machinery. He switched off his light and crept forward. The tunnel opened into a large, excavated chamber. It was clean, modern, and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the decaying tunnel. It was a laboratory, and in the center of the lab, he saw them, the children, Lily, Sam, and Caleb. They were not in cages. They were in sterile-looking beds, sleeping soundly, hooked up to IV drips and monitors that beeped with a steady, rhythmic pulse. A woman in a lab coat was checking their vitals. Reacher felt a cold fury rise within him. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. This was something far more sinister. He stayed in the shadows, watching, listening. He saw another figure enter the lab. It was Alistair Sterling. He was older than Reacher expected, frail-looking, but his eyes burned with an unsettling intensity. "How are they, Doctor?" Sterling asked the woman. "The subjects are responding well," she replied, her voice clinical and detached. The gene therapy is being accepted by their systems. There have been no signs of rejection. If this works, Mr. Sterling, it could cure the genetic disorder that has plagued your family for generations. Reacher understood. This wasn't about ransom. It wasn't about cruelty for its own sake. It was about a twisted, desperate attempt to save his own bloodline. Sterling was using these innocent children as human lab rats, testing a dangerous and experimental cure for a hereditary disease. The other children, the ones who had disappeared over the years, they were the failed experiments. Sterling walked over to Lily Patterson's bed and gently stroked her hair. "Such a sacrifice," he whispered, "but for the greater good, a noble purpose." That was enough for Reacher. He had seen all he needed to see. The problem was clear. Now it was time for the solution. He stepped out of the shadows. "I think the children's parents might disagree with your definition of noble," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence in the sterile room. The doctor gasped. Sterling spun around, his face a mask of shock and outrage. Two guards who had been standing by a far door immediately drew their weapons and advanced on Reacher. "Kill him!" Sterling ordered, his voice a venomous hiss. The first guard rushed forward. He was big, confident. He swung his pistol like a club. Reacher sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him past. Reacher brought his clasped hands down on the back of the man's neck. The guard crumpled to the floor without a sound. The second guard was more cautious. He kept his distance, aiming his gun at Reacher's chest. "Don't move!" Reacher didn't stop. He walked forward, calm and deliberate. The guard's eyes widened. He pulled the trigger. The click was deafeningly loud in the quiet lab. The gun had misfired, or the safety was on. In that split second of hesitation, Reacher closed the distance. He grabbed the guard's wrist, twisting it until the bone snapped with a sickening crack. The guard screamed as Reacher disarmed him and sent him to the floor with a single precise blow to the temple. Now it was just Reacher, Sterling, and the doctor. The doctor was frozen in terror. Sterling, however, seemed to regain his composure. He backed away toward a console. "You have no idea what you are interfering with," Sterling said, his voice trembling with rage. "This is science. This is progress." "This is murder," Reacher corrected him. He began to walk toward the children. His first priority was to get them disconnected and out of there. "Stay away from them," Sterling shrieked, and he slammed a large red button on the console. An alarm blared. Steel shutters began to slam down over the entrances. Reacher realized Sterling wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to lock them all in. And then he saw Sterling grab a large syringe from a tray. "If I can't have my cure," Sterling snarled, his eyes wild, "then no one will have these children. I will erase all evidence of my work." He lunged toward the nearest bed, Sam Bell's bed, the syringe held like a dagger. Reacher moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, intercepting Sterling just as he reached the child. Reacher didn't waste time. He didn't say a word. He hit Sterling once, a short, hard punch to the jaw. The frail man's head snapped back and he collapsed, the syringe clattering to the floor. Reacher turned to the doctor, who was now huddled in a corner. "Get them unhooked, now!" The woman, jolted into action, scrambled to the beds and began to carefully remove the IV lines and sensors. Reacher stood guard, watching the now sealed door, listening. He could hear shouting and pounding from the other side. Sterling's reinforcements had arrived. He looked around the lab, his mind racing, assessing his options. There was no way out through the main tunnel. But there had to be another way. A ventilation shaft. A service exit. He spotted a heavy steel hatch in the floor with a wheel-like lock. "What's that?" he demanded, pointing. "Waste disposal," the doctor stammered. "It leads to an outflow pipe by the river." "Will it fit a person?" I think so. It's not meant for—" "It is now," Reacher said. He went to the hatch and began to turn the heavy wheel. It was stiff with disuse, but his raw strength forced it to move. With a loud groan of protesting metal, the lock released. He heaved the hatch open. Below was a dark, narrow chute. The pounding on the main door was getting louder. They were using a ram. Reacher went to the children. They were beginning to stir, groggy from the sedatives. He lifted Lily into his arms. She was so small, so light. "You," he said to the doctor. "You take the boy, Sam. Then come back for Caleb." He slid down the chute first, landing in a shallow stream of murky water at the bottom of a concrete pipe. He helped the doctor down with Sam. The sound of the lab door finally giving way echoed down the chute. "Go," Reacher ordered. "Keep moving, I'll get the other one." He scrambled back up the chute just as two of Sterling's armed men burst into the lab. They saw him, and they saw the open hatch. Reacher didn't give them time to aim. He grabbed a heavy metal stool and threw it. It caught the first man in the chest, sending him staggering back into the second. Reacher grabbed Caleb, who was now awake and crying softly, and slid back down the chute. Behind him, he heard the first shots, bullets ricocheting off the metal walls of the chute. He half-carried, half-dragged the boy down the outflow pipe, following the doctor and the other child. The pipe was dark and smelled foul, but it was a path to safety. They emerged from the pipe under a small bridge on the far side of the river, well away from the Sterling estate. The night air was cold, but it had never felt so good. The three children were weak but unharmed. Reacher looked at the doctor. "You're going to walk into the sheriff's station. You're going to tell Sheriff Brody everything. You're going to testify against Sterling. If you don't, I will find you. And you will be very, very sorry. Do you understand?" The woman nodded, her face pale with terror and a dawning sense of the horror she had been a part of. Reacher watched her lead the children toward the distant lights of the town. He didn't follow. His part was over. He had found the problem, and he had delivered the solution. The rest was up to the system. He walked back to his motel, collected his few belongings, and paid his bill. By the time the first rays of dawn were breaking over Havenwood, he was at the bus stop. The early morning bus arrived right on time. As he was about to board, Sheriff Brody's car pulled up. Brody got out. He didn't look weary anymore. He looked like a man who had finally found his courage. "The children are safe," Brody said. "The doctor is singing like a canary. We have Sterling in custody. We're raiding the mill now. It's over." Reacher nodded. "The parents, they want to thank you," Brody continued. "The whole town." "I don't need thanks," Reacher said. He looked at the town, no longer shrouded in a suffocating silence, but humming with the first sounds of a new day. The secrets were out. The sickness was being cleansed. "Where will you go?" Brody asked. Reacher just looked at the bus. The destination didn't matter. He got on, paid his fare in cash, and took a seat in the back. He didn't look back as the bus pulled away, leaving Havenwood and its reclaimed children behind. He had arrived by chance, stayed by choice, and now he was leaving because his work was done. The road ahead was empty, and that was just the way he liked it.